Mike Dunafon is an independent voice for restoring liberty in America, and like the Arab Spring changed the political landscape in the Middle East, Mike is trying to start a political revolution, or as he puts it, an American Spring, in 2014. And he's keen to prove that an independent public servant who refuses to take any money from anyone can win a major statewide political office, primarily using social media to unleash the ideas of liberty, independence, and individual rights. So he's going to be talking a little bit more with us about that today. So he'll talk a little bit, and then feel free to ask any questions that you have. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mike Dunafon.
Thank you. I think, Amanda, we're gonna use these.
Oh, gotcha. That's right. We don't want to use this.
One of the yesterday on Fox 31, they kind of took us by surprise. I didn't expect that was going to happen. So we're getting a lot of attention about running for office, and of course they used the strip club candidate angle, which is fine with me. Other than the fact I don't own a strip club, my fiance of 20 years does. And the reason we are still engaged to one another is we're not going to become an article of this state. And that's the reason for that. Plus, you never know, you could get booted at any time with no contractual obligations whatsoever. You could lose it all. So they outed me yesterday. Eli called up. Evidently, he'd seen or listened to the Grassroots radio show on Monday night and said, "What are you doing?" So I told him what I was doing, and he got everything right with the exception of the "It Bleeds, It Leads" line, which is the strip club, which is wonderful. It gets attention. I am also not taking any campaign donations, none. So, because I truly believe that is what has corrupted the process to the point that good people, by the time they reach that office, cannot do good things because they have made obligations to people to get into that office that they have to fulfill. And they will badger you to no end for that purpose. Now, I got into office by sitting in a council meeting and watching a prior mayor in 1998 decide that he was going to perfect a new Carrie Nations movement. In other words, he was going to recruit the religious right out of Colorado Springs, also Charles Keating and Ed Meese, along with our friend James Dobson, to put sin out of Glendale. Well, they passed ordinance number 4 declaring that Debbie's business should be lit like this, and you needed a 6-foot pole for tips, and naked women, or topless women, not naked women, were somehow evil. 3 days after that ordinance was passed, we got a phone call asking us to join a fellow for lunch across the street. There was a Mexican restaurant across the street at that time. And this fellow, Rod Brown, rolled out a set of plans this thick for Debbie's property and declared that it was a circumstance. He had spent the last year and a half putting this whole scheme together to use a government to put a legitimate business and 300 people out of work. I was angry at a cellular level. Debbie took 40 of the most gorgeous women you've ever seen with voter registration cards and free beer tickets, and we quadrupled the voter rolls, and 31 days later threw them out of office. Now, the last thing on my mind was that I could envision would be that I would be standing here tonight. I've been out of the country for 17 years. The Bronco thing, I've got the beard back. I can't grow the ponytail anymore to look like a skullet. So I traded my house for a sailboat and left. When I was gone, the country changed. When I came back, I spent a lot of time in foreign countries talking about America and how this would never happen, what I'd seen in these other countries. I lived in the British Virgin Islands, which is the capital of the British Virgin Islands, and it's offshore banking. It's a little island that is effectively too small to be corrupt because you have to grease all the buckets. The 4 families controlling the island actually communicate with one another, so you can't be effectively corrupt. You don't get anything for your payoff. They were having their children in the United States Virgin Islands. I was watching all this take place, and I couldn't believe that our government would condone such a thing. Well, when I came back and got involved in politics, totally by accident, I realized that I was wrong. And the change that had swept over the country, I wrote an essay to myself back then because I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It was much worse than I anticipated because we were essentially still sleeping back then. We're just now starting to wake up. It's like Tojo or Yamamoto who said, we've awakened a sleeping giant. I believe that can happen again. I also believe that, like the pamphleteers, we have in our hands the ability to communicate with one another, the entire world, in real time. If we will embrace technology, as in the Arab Spring didn't go the way the people on Twitter wanted it to go necessarily, but when you take a look at what happened, they went around the intelligence agencies of those nations by communicating 140 characters to one another. They empowered, like the first pamphleteers, they were able to amass people ahead of the state. That should tell us something. It's a very, very important concept. A little story about an Irish fellow, since I'm Irish, that wanted to win the lottery. So every morning, Seamus would get up and he said, Jesus, today, I want to win the lottery. Nothing. This goes on for 30 years. Finally, Seamus gets up one morning, he looks at the ceiling, and he hears a voice. It says, Seamus. Oh my God, who's that? He says, it's God, Seamus. He said, God, I've been trying. He said, I know, for 30 years, Seamus. 30 years you've been looking up in the morning and you've been saying to me, God, today let me win the lottery. Yes, God. He said, Seamus, meet me halfway. Buy a ticket. That's the situation we're in today. The people who are unwilling to buy a ticket expect to have the winnings. The winnings come from the ticket sales. That's simple, simple economics. Well, in preparation for this, and I will run if we get to 60,000 likes. It's kind of it's a test to see if there's actually a group out there that will promote this and go fight for what we believe in. If this group does not exist, we'll either have to wait or somebody else will have to do it because we don't have the manpower to make it happen. And we're not taking money. We've got to prove that we can change politics in the world, not just the United States. And the parties are assiduously ignoring the fact that the Arab Spring occurred the way it occurred. So if we do this, we're going to fundamentally send an earthquake through both of the parties. They're out raising money. And I held a fundraiser for Tom. I'm going to hold another one for Scott Gessler. You want the money? Take the money. But that's not the point. And if I manage to get in a debate with them by polling 10%, I will remind them that I gave them the money. Why are you being so mean to me? I gave you the money. It was all about money, wasn't it? Not ideas. So we've gone so far down that track. So what I've done, and I hope this doesn't bore you tonight, I've been watching this debate on minimum wage and thinking about what does that really have to do with private property rights. One of the things that we're concentrating on in our little group, and you're part of that, is the idea of a liberty key. We get into debates constantly with people that can't debate us, but we somehow lose the debate. Now, how in the world does that happen? Because they're not bad people, and many of them are our friends until we start to talk about politics. And then it goes to hell. And we have to agree just to either shrink away, say nothing, or agree with them, which we can't possibly do. So I've written this, and the reason I do this is I want to clarify these ideas in my mind. I want you to tell me if they resonate with you. It may be a little long-winded. I hope it makes sense. And in a group like this, I can say these things. I wouldn't attempt to do this any other pub in America, I'll guarantee it, without this group. So I call it the study on the minimum wage and the property rights liberty key. Where did it come from? It seems that every administration in modern times has used the argument that the lack of a livable wage is the reason for poverty and unemployment. This canard is the perfect example of the type of thoughtless, feels-good rhetoric that is gobbled up by low-information voters and advocates of class warfare. Thinking like this leads one to believe that you could cure alcoholism with a drink. And just like the alcoholic, elected officials use the livable wage cocktail as an anesthetic to deaden the thought process necessary to critically analyze one's own life and subsequently reject the false promise of the livable wage. Understanding the opportunities and that they are created through education and self-discipline, they cannot envision through the fog of entitlement addiction that self-assessment requires clear-headed critical analysis. The internal dialogue of the benefits addict is always the same, and we hear it constantly. Why attempt to succeed in an entry-level job that only benefits a greedy employer who is unwilling to pay me what I'm worth? A livable wage. The victim belief dialogue was learned in an educational system that hands out blue ribbons to all the participants on field day. For those too young to remember field day, because they did away with it, every year in the early spring, primary schools held an outdoor celebration of the new season and the return of good weather. Games were played that consisted of running, throwing, jumping, tug-of-war, three-legged races, just about any game you could think of. The premise of field day: education through competition builds strong character, with an emphasis placed on giving it all. And no matter whether you won or lost, you were expected to exhibit grace and humility. However, a change was afoot. A new school of thought that began decades before in Europe was gaining acceptance. Equality of opportunity was giving way to the equality of outcome. Overt competition was deemed destructive to self-esteem and those less gifted. This enlightened, sensitive approach to education went on to permeate the classrooms as well. Students were evaluated on where they'd come from and their particular circumstances in life, like an unfulfilled or abusive childhood, not on what they'd done to overcome these difficult beginnings. Everyone became a victim. Blue ribbons, diplomas, and high self-esteem would make up for these early sorrows. No need to teach critical thinking skills. The type of thinking that promotes your critical self-analysis, the self-analysis needed to find your real talents and pursue your personal path to fulfillment, was no longer needed. Certainly not. That could undo all that hard-won self-esteem. The world just needed more people that felt good about themselves. And now we have them. As of December of 2013, we reached a milestone in our country. 10,988,269 people, Americans, were receiving federal disability payments. This number is greater than the number of citizens in Greece, kind of an apt comparison considering what the entitlement state has done for Greece. And the consequences of their entitlement state are well known today. For 202 straight months, disability entitlement rolls have grown. They've doubled since 1995. The Social Security Administration defines a disabled worker as a, quote, beneficiary who worked in covered employment long enough to be insured and who had been working recently in covered employment prior to the disability onset. December of 2013, we reached another milestone. Monthly benefits on average climbed to $1,200 a month. Dependent children under 16 to $310. extra dependents of 343. And by the way, if you were married for 10 years to your ex-spouse, your spouse could declare benefits. According to the annual statistics report on Social Security disability insurance, mental disorder was the highest diagnostic group, 35.5%, with 14.1% of that group declaring as their work-related disorder as mood disorder. Imagine the lowest group, that group of 35.1%, or the mood disorder group was single with no dependents, just making the average monthly benefits check, costing the United States $643,978,391 a month. This is all going along while our political elites pontificate about income inequality. I was in a Metro Mayor's Caucus meeting, and Mayor Hancock stood up and told the caucus last month, America's #1 problem, the biggest problem we face in the United States, is income inequality. What really happens here that is massive numbers of people who do not pay federal income taxes qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit. Well, bringing their 40-hour minimum wage job, which is about $15,000 a year, to $35,000 a year. As with most well-meaning entitlement programs, the title of the program, Earned Income Tax Credit, obscures the intent and the unintended consequences suffered by the taxpayer and the recipient, once again playing into the hands of the political elites and the savior state. The victim dialogue fueled by the livable wage stupor serves to build the recipient class livable wage earner to the underlying political motives surrounded by the livable wage. Considering the state of education and the lack of developed critical thinking skills, we may have reached a point where the minimum wage earner cares less about the real political motives behind the political elites using him as a pawn, making it incumbent upon us, the few left, with the perspective on the past and the hope for the future, to tell the real story. Just one example of the political repercussions of the legislated minimum wage that goes largely unknown. Union contracts are negotiated based on multiples of the minimum wage, and therefore his livable wage is the primary tool used to secure union campaign funds for political elites in their next election. That is why the political elites don't just go for it and declare a $100 an hour minimum wage as the livable wage. The golden goose would die on the spot. The flow-through effect to the union's minimum wage multiple calculations would break the bank. The livable wage argument promotes the victim mentality necessary to perpetuate the disability mentality, as told through one's tragic life story, serving to promote the us against them dichotomy that allows the undereducated and undermotivated to assuage any responsibility for their circumstances, all the while playing into the hands of the political class that created the problem in the first place. This is happening as the same political class that incessantly lobbies for more education funding claims that the lack of resources to enhance the future employment options of the underclass through better schools and smaller class sizes claims that that's the real problem. The flight from education combined with the social welfare benefits that pay people not to work produce an entitlement nightmare for the taxpayer and a windfall for the political class that at the same time uses this group to condemn rampant inequality in every facet of our society. The political class has mastered the game of becoming the hero of their own tragedy. Combine the nature of the recipient class armed with their victim story and their lack of critical thinking skills, those skills necessary to assess their value in the marketplace, and you have an angry group of people who are willing to listen to anything the political class tells them. Career political elites are happy to serve up the livable wage cocktail. Like any good bartender, they're always happy to listen. That is until closing time. Closing time is the day after the last election. The bar will reopen 12 months before the next election. In our modern day world of soundbite arguments, your argument has to be short. 30 seconds any longer and you have lost your audience. Subsequently, the political class pandering to those willing to drink the minimum wage cocktail have the advantage. They have mastered the game of heads I win, tails you lose. As an example, time yourself while saying, everybody deserves a livable wage. Takes me 2 seconds. What does that statement contain within our accepted hidden meanings implicitly accepted as true? Everyone has value. We're all humans. It's about social justice. Why should anyone consider themselves better than anyone else? All of the lessons that have been taught and accepted true since we began handing out only blue ribbons. The opposite of these statements carries within a message that are equally as powerful. Assuming you're opposed to an increase in the minimum wage or any minimum wage at all, you would be accused of saying, not everyone has value. Some people are less human than others. You promote inequality. You don't care about justice. You consider some people to be better than others. When we are faced with this trap, we often withdraw in frustration, believing that the situation is hopeless. It's not hopeless, and this is why. The last statement takes 3.5 seconds. Now, in the light of critical thinking skills of the average minimum wage earner, try creating a 7-second slogan to explain the false issues inherent with everyone deserves a minimum wage, a livable wage. Any success, you had twice as long to think about it. Why should anyone consider themselves better than anyone else? Herein lies the major advantage for the political class. This emotional 2-second slogan contains the seeds of altruistic half-truths that innervate both Judeo-Christian Western thought and the atheist-based socialist utopian programs of to each according to his need. I will attempt to under a minute. Ironically, this is the tip of the political iceberg. The damage done by the minimum wage stupor reaches every level of our society. Let's start with a concept upon which our country was founded: private property rights. It would be very difficult for any of us to argue for the destruction of private property rights when they're examined at their most basic level, unless, of course, the underlying motivation is to specifically destroy the concept in the pursuit of some other goal. The problem faced by the proponents of liberty predicated on property rights is that individuals seldom examine much in their daily existence. Nevertheless, the foundations of our freedom in this country. This leaves the field of laissez-faire economics open to the charlatans, misinformed or ill-informed educators trained in the utopian school based on the Enlightenment philosophies that promote subjectivity through constructivist rationalism. A form of thought that says nothing can ever be truly known and is perceptual and ephemeral and subject to the opinion of the observer. Well, not so much. I grew up on a ranch. Try that on a ranch where you fail to recognize things that are real that can or will kill you. Think about following rules without understanding the knowledge that forms the reason for the rules. Most of the people in our society don't run a red light because they don't want a traffic ticket. I don't run a red light because the other side is green. It's a pretty simple example. And growing up on a ranch where I come from, not even the dumbest dog puts his tongue on a hot stove twice. We seem to be doing a lot of that. This is the fundamental difference between a life solely based in induction and void of deduction. We certainly apply both forms of logic to our daily lives. However, we should embrace the obligation to deduce our lives to axiomatic truths through our powers of logic. Failing to do so leaves us in a neverland and subject to the schemes and whims of the political elites and their intellectual foot soldiers. Is there an unassailable axiomatic argument in defense of property rights? If so, we must deduce the primary essence or fundamental form of property, private property, from which all other rights follow. Some of you may have read Dr. Hans Hermann Hoppe. If you haven't, I would suggest you do. Hermann Hoppe traces private property to the individual and his life-sustaining unit, his body. In the opening chapter of A Theory on Socialism and Capitalism, he lays out the argument that you and only you possess the right to make decisions pertaining to the use of your body, and that this is the fundamental axiomatic level of private property. All other claims to private property must be weighed against the argument that you, and you alone, are the sole and primary beneficiary of your body. And since you can't have more than one body, your body is a scarce resource. The entire field of economics would not exist in a land of total abundance. Economics is based on the use and control of scarce resources. However, even in the land of total abundance, the Garden of Eden, you may in fact suffer from scarcity. Suppose that you wanted to do more than one thing at a time, and it required more than one body. Your economic consideration then becomes the allocation of your one and only body. You must evaluate what you want to do first and prioritize the sequence of that activity. This is Adam's economic dilemma while living alone in the garden. Now, the fundamental progenitor of economics arrives with the introduction of a second person. And by the way, all the economic arguments since, Eve. Total abundance would lead one to believe that conflicts could not exist. What must be done when our soon-to-be loving couple choose to occupy the same space at the same time? And by the way, if you think that can't happen, any of us who've raised more than one child will say that they've had to split them up while trying to occupy the same space in a 4-bedroom house and not giving up on it. The next scarce resource to be introduced in our story, of course, after eating from the tree of knowledge, time. Time, a concept we were given as a gift for our transgressions. For our newly found freedom, we must satisfy various needs. We have to take care of our body. We have to take care of time. So here we are in a situation where we are fighting an argument constantly. We are condemned in the founding of our country based on the fact that our founding fathers were slave owners. Any transgression of any historical context taken out of context is blamed for the argument we make, and this argument is never made. So ask one of your progressive friends while you're in this argument if they believe in a woman's right to choose, which I do. And they'll say yes. Do you condone slavery? Of course I don't. Do you think that two homosexual men should be wed? Which I believe they should. They are making a contract with one another with their scarce resources to enter into a union, use their scarce resources as they choose to do so. Should they be able to smoke marijuana? Yes. Then why would you tell me that I cannot make a contract with my body for any amount of money I choose? You're selling me into servitude. You are telling me that my scarce resource belongs to you. I would like you to reconcile for me why you get to tell me the value of my body. So if you truly believe that the scarce resource, the only thing we truly own, and by the way, without our bodies and without time, we don't exist. Our scarce resource is our body. Our scarce resource is our time. And no one should tell you what to do with it. So thanks for bearing through with that. It's an argument that you can expand on in any way based on, because it's all about scarcity and it's about ownership of your one and only scarce resource, and it's your body and your time. And the time is the fickle part of it. You don't have a guarantee for time. So, questions or comments? I wouldn't try this with any other group, by the way, so thanks for letting me. Yeah. Any comments? Yeah.
So what is the 7-second response to minimum wage or living wage?
Should you tell me what to do with my body? I think that's 3 seconds. But you have to be able to back it up. The argument, because they pick the arguments that they agree with. A woman's right to choose, it's an argument. Gay marriage, it's an argument that we agree on. Why all of a sudden do they get to pick through the rights that they want to own and turn you into a slave on the other ones? They don't get to do that. And even a hardcore progressive cannot answer that argument if you understand where private property rights come from. It's really not prior appropriation. I know economically people talk about prior appropriation and adding your time to a resource that had not been appropriated before that. And there's if you ever read Oppenheimer, Franz Oppenheimer, The State, is a great book to read about prior appropriation. And he debunks the prior appropriation argument. Hoppe, and Rothbard said Hoppe has nailed it way better than he could ever nail it. So it's important, I think, to develop these types of arguments because we don't want to fight with them, we want to recruit them. Because I've got progressive friends, and I cannot for the life of you tell you why I like them. Keep having them over, and every time I say, I'll never do that again. Other comments? Well, you either hated it or you're dumbfounded. Yes?
When you discuss property rights, you down to the woman's right to choose. At what point does a fetus have property rights? Are you saying that suggesting it's only at birth? Or?
No, I'm not suggesting any of that. I actually truly abhor abortion. I've been in situations where relatives have had abortions. I think it should never be used as birth control. I think it's wrong. I don't think you should ever be forced to pay for it. I've watched the repercussions of those abortions over the lives of the people that had them. Conscious thinking people, it's a devastating event in their life. But I cannot make a decision for another person. I know there's the moral imperative. Well, a lot of churches have had moral imperatives. We're seeing a religion or life program killing people for their moral imperative, stoning homosexuals. I just have to draw the line and say I will not pass my judgment on another person. And the argument is endless. It could be at conception. It could be in the second trimester. It could be in the third trimester. When does it become murder? We should not be paying for it at any level. You should not force another person or coerce them to use their time and their body to condone or pay for that behavior. So.
Yeah, I think it's very important to bring this argument to ownership, self-ownership. But another, an adjunct you can use with leftist friends is confuse them and point out that one of the models, we're always looking for models that we use in the United States to emulate. One of the models is Germany, and Germany, I believe, doesn't have any minimum wage whatsoever.
I think that's right. Yeah. Yes.
So confuse them.
More so?
No,
No, they're already totally confused.
confuse the leftists. Point out
Right behind you, he had his hand up first. Yes.
I think one of the things when people talk about minimum wage that is, especially from a libertarian standpoint, is the fact of having real money and the fact of what would $7.25 an hour actually be that same number represent 100 years ago when money actually had real value and the living standard of those people. How can you do that at a state level as a mayor, or maybe with the laws that are in place with, say, gold and silver, using real money, and how it's basically illegal to do that?
I study that actually, yes, quite a deal, quite a bit. The problem, one of the first treatises written on that subject, and it has just been discovered, it was in Latin and translated into English, was written by Copernicus. So you want to go look that up. You can find it at the Liberty Library online, and I think von Mises may have it. To enter into that argument with the rank and file people in a city council meeting or the citizens and talk about quantitative easing, talk about all of the various shenanigans going on with central banks, usually turns them off immediately. At the level of office that I hold, I would have no effect whatsoever other than awareness. If you could get somebody, recruit them into spending the 10 minutes a day necessary to understand some of those concepts, it's well worthwhile. I have chosen to try to translate the knowledge of the things that affect them directly, like a minimum wage. Of course, inflation and quantitative easing steals from us while we're sleeping. But I find the Copernicus document, you're going to find things in there that were stolen by John Maynard Keynes. It's pretty interesting. Yes?
One of the things you mentioned was that the appeal of the liberals to put more money in schools in order to have smaller classes. And when more money is put into schools, you don't result in smaller classes. You end up with larger bureaucracy, and nobody ever goes back and says, where did our money go? Which is one of the great problems with liberalism. Nobody calls it accounting. We've had a war against poverty for 40 years, and it seems that we've lost.
The real purpose behind core curriculum is to account for failure. And core curriculum then will give you the opportunity to demand more money. So we're always accounting for failure because there is no success. And until we wake up from this stupor we're in and start transmitting these messages simply, trying to create liberty keys so people understand these issues, we're going to lose the debate because we don't control the media. That's what's so wonderful about a smart device in your hand and a Twitter account. You can actually start communicating with the world. And that's what I hope will happen. Now, it's got to happen eventually, or they'll all be taken away from us. Anybody else? Yes?
You have to choose one government organization to abolish.
The IRS.
What would you do? You think that's the most important organization to abolish?
That's the only thing that funds the other organizations. It's the only. It's the only thing that has the power of coercion. I did a video called "The House and the Sword," and everybody says they're not going to use the sword. The sword is in a back room of the house, and the sword can only be removed from the stone by the occupant of the house. And they will eventually hack up their own friends with the sword. The IRS is the most evil organization on the planet. Yes?
You mentioned that you may be running for office. What's the office you're going to be considering running for?
Well, if I get to 60,000 likes on Facebook, I will petition on to the ballot with 1,000 signatures and run for governor as an independent, unaffiliated candidate and take 0 campaign dollars.
The minimum wage argument you brought up does affect a lot of people, but I also feel like there's another issue that affects people daily, and that's traffic. Nobody likes traffic. It's an inefficient system, and it's a consequence of a monopoly. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on the issue of tackling that.
Well, we're in love with this idea of $1 million, $100 million a mile rail. When bus rapid transit, if you actually had bus rapid transit to solve that, and I don't mean pulling over and stopping and clogging up traffic, you would have to dedicate a lane to it. Most people don't understand that we had a trolley system in Denver, a magnificent trolley system. It went all the way to Golden, and the bus lobby destroyed the trolley system. So that's a buy-in through education, not this hyperbole, we want to look like a socialist nation where everybody's riding the train. That's a buy-in from the people who really are willing to do something about it. And then you're going to fight the PUC. It's like Uber. Uber should be allowed to exist. It's a wonderful concept. But the PUC, in their monopoly, is going to try to prevent it. So, yes, we could solve a lot of the traffic congestion if we agreed to solve it, rather than RTD's out of money. I was in a meeting this morning. They are, the Northwest Corridor is expected to be refunded in 2084. It's kind of like the 10-year homeless plan. You always want to have a 10-year homeless plan when you have an 8-year office term. You're going to get out of there just 2 years in time. Anybody else? Yes?
What's your opinion about the minimum income or negative income tax?
Negative income tax.
Yeah, Bill Freeman proposed it. I don't know if you looked at that or if you still be against that or.
I don't think there should be an income tax. Right now, I don't know if you all are familiar with phantom income. Anybody familiar with phantom income? Try that on for size. We actually have phantom income, and you will pay a lot of money for phantom income. It's not real income, but the IRS will come after you for it, audit you, and lock up all your possessions for phantom income. Yes?
This question might be for your fiance, actually.
Right there.
Yes. When will the business and employees start accepting Bitcoin?
I'm sure they'd be happy to accept 1 Bitcoin for a lap dance, I'll tell you that. They're kind of, the problem with the Bitcoin in her business is you can't put them in a T-bar.
You can print it on under print the QR code.
Okay, a Bitcoin tattoo. There you go. Anybody else? Yes?
But did I hear this right? You reduced the employee count in Glendale by 40%?
Actually, at one point it was 60%.
And so, and how did you manage to do that? What are the effects, positive and negative, on the life in Glendale?
Well,
Police response time?
Oh, well, we did several things. The first thing we did is examine the taxation levels. They were going out for a lodger's tax for the purpose of the general fund. Never, I don't vote for taxes usually anyway, unless they're focused on something that's going to do something in particular that nobody else will do. General fund taxes get lost in the milieu. Glendale's government in 1998 was growing at about 12% a year. So they had just under 160 employees. We eventually reduced that to 58, I believe. So it was quite a reduction. Now, we also did an intergovernmental agreement with Denver for their fire services. Denver Fire is a wonderful, one of the best fire departments in the country. Now, I don't agree with the union aspects of that sort of thing. But an ISO rating, your insurance rating, is based on your fire service protection rating model. We had an ISO number of 6, so insurance levels were very high in the city. We did an intergovernmental agreement, saved the city $1.4 million a year, leased them our firehouse and our trucks, brought Denver Fire over, did lateral transfers with our fire people, made them retest. 60% of them failed the test, so that gives you an idea of, with lateral rank for rank, threw out the Barca loungers, there were 20 of those, and took our ISO rating to a 1, the highest. That was just one example of it. Finding ways to not compete with the tax-paying businesses while serving your citizens is another issue. We have an average household or a mean household income in Glendale of $35,000, very low. 13 languages are spoken. The average age is 27 years old. People are in the expansion phase of their lives. They're matriculating out. So we don't have what I call in the surrounding area cave people, and that's an acronym for Citizens Against Virtually Everything. So we don't have a lot of cave dwellers in Glendale, so we're able to do things. So we built, with a lodger's tax dedicated to recreation and filling our hotels on the weekend. I don't know if you've been to Infinity Park. Now we're the rugby capital of North America. 180 million households over the 2-year period of watching the Churchill Cup around the world watch Glendale. So that's when we started calling Denver our suburb. And because that's enormous. We were filling our hotels on the weekends at 59%, it's now 91%. Because we built a room where they could have their conventions. We also built a beautiful health club for the people that couldn't afford the Cherry Creek Athletic Club. But why would we compete with them? They're a taxpayer. So we charged our citizens $8, and if you're not a citizen, you pay more than you would pay to go to the Cherry Creek Athletic Club. Made the Cherry Creek Athletic Club very happy. And the apartments we're the most densely populated city in Colorado. We have 2 single-family homes, 1 is occupied. We charge them $8 a month, and they're including it, most of them, in their rents. So you think about opportunity and expanding the pie. It's not shrinking the pie. Everybody talks about there's only so much business. There isn't. That's somebody who can't think of an idea. There's only so much business. Yeah.
Do I understand right that the city built the athletic club?
Yes.
Why would it compete against private enterprise?
I think I just explained that. We didn't.
What?
We didn't.
How did you fund it?
We funded it with a lodger's tax and told the hotels that you're going to go to a 90% hotel rate, occupancy rate at the end of the week on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
So you increased the lodging tax, so you got...
No, we put in a lodging tax. We didn't have one.
Okay, so you added a lodging tax.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but so you took public funds to compete against essentially private enterprise. So if somebody owns...
Wait a minute. Who did we compete with?
Well, if somebody owns private property and wanted to convert the property to a sporting club or athletic club, they were competing against you, that you could get lower financing because you were funded by tax?
No, we've actually taken our bond rating and given it to private business. So, to answer your question, the people in our city could not afford, they don't make any money. The room that it also supplied was a room that seats 1,000 people. The hotels had a room that seated 120 people. They were losing the convention business to Cherry Creek. So to compete with Cherry Creek, we created a room for them that paid for the health club for the citizens who couldn't go to Cherry Creek Athletic Club, and we got the buy-in before we ever did it from private enterprise. We did not compete with them.
I've agreed with about 99% of what you said, Frank, but I have difficulty with that because you're saying that you thought it was a good thing to have for your citizens. And it's the same argument that a progressive might say, we have to provide all of these things, and we're going to do it by raising taxes and extort money from other people to pay for the thing that we think is good.
Okay, except, I agree with that argument, We didn't do it without asking the businesses first whether or not we could do it. We explained the model to them and they said yes. The other thing is we reduced crime by 60% in our city. We took the Crips and the Bloods, who had no place to play soccer, and brought them over and said, we're going to build this, and just like Tom Bodette, we will leave the lights on for you and we will give you internet connectivity in the park. If you tag us, and Jeff's a city councilman as well, if you tag us, we will turn the lights off and take your soccer ball away. No tagging in Glendale. We don't lock up the paint cans. We don't turn people into criminals, and we didn't do it before we asked private enterprise if they liked the model. So.
Do most private enterprises opt out? They don't want to pay the tax?
They're not. Lodger's tax is paid by visitors.
When can those people opt out?
They can certainly opt out if they'd like to.
In the course of reducing the number of employees in the city, did you find there were any acts of sabotage to undermine your efforts to reduce the payroll? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. One night I just said to Debbie that I'm in agony. I don't know what's wrong here, but I think you need to call an ambulance. And so it turned out I was suffering from kidney stones. So remember, your mother would teach you at my age that you, so I'm in the shower curled up because I'm going to the hospital, right? You gotta have clean underwear and you have to take a shower. So I called her into the bathroom and said, look here, call the police and get them over here. She said, what do the police have to do with it? I said, you don't understand, those firemen, they were giving us death threats. And a lot of those firemen were EMTs, and if one of these guys shows up in this ambulance, I'm in deep shit. So yes, we had several little interesting interludes with our ex-firefighters.
I think you're kind of sort of alluding to this, though, kind of there, that you have all these great ideas and all this stuff there. Like, what kind of resistance did you meet, and how did you deal with it?
We met tremendous resistance. The basic resistance you're going to meet is people like the status quo. And they also, the resistance from the other side is, you should do more. Well, there's a certain amount of things that you can actually get done, I believe, and that's through collaboration. For instance, in a city meeting, we built Infinity Park. Everybody, my view of management is everybody in every meeting knows everything. There's no triangulation. If you are using a need-to-know basis for what you're doing, people will triangulate and use that information as currency, and you'll have heroes, perpetrators, and victims. So we don't do that. That's helped a lot to solve some of the problems of believing that you can get where you want to go more easily, because it takes a group of people to make that happen. Ironically, in my view, it takes a group of individuals, which is kind of it's an oxymoron, a group of individuals. Yeah.
If you have this great idea, like about a health club, and you can, get buy-in from business owners, like hotel owners, get them to, charge a little extra per night, get the guests to pay for it. Why isn't that something that like a private business is doing? Why doesn't that make you think, okay, maybe instead of being a politician, I could start this business with a health club and get rich off of that, instead of saying this is a tax and we're improving the city that way. It's actually profitable and people are buying it.
It's a great argument, except that the corporations won't do it. They'll just sell their hotel. They'll take a look at it as an asset. For instance, the Lowe's just sold to Hyatt. So they don't, the corporate structure is as bad in many ways as the government structure. They're looking at not the long term, the longevity of what they're doing. They're looking at depreciated assets. They're also looking at return on investment. And so the bean counter says, we don't really care about what's happening in the city or with this population of people. We're going to tear this asset down. When in fact, we felt we could compete with a neighboring city, which we did, and we continue to now. So in many ways, it's a mixture of the two concepts.
Are you optimistic about the future? Do you think a lot of libertarian ideas and stuff will be implemented?
I'm a dumb Irishman, so I've never lost my optimism. I am optimistic. I'm hoping that Americans remember who they are. We were a nation of immigrants that battled our way across. We can't allow that story to be ripped up and torn to shreds by people who have, in my mind, a terrible, terrible agenda for us. And I'm unwilling to surrender to that.
So if you are elected governor, what are some of the more interesting things you'll do right out of the gate?
I'd take all the nonviolent offenders and let them out of prison. And the problem you face, I'm on the board of Step 13. I don't know if you know what Step 13 is. The problem then they face, and we do this in the city, we make them, we hire people. You can't resurrect somebody if they can't go back to work. How do you do that? So say you're spending $24,000 a year on a prisoner, a nonviolent offender. Why in the world wouldn't you cut your losses by half, cut the taxes of the guy that hires this person, gives them a resume to work on, and let them take that with them and pay the guy through tax rebates to hire the guy, get experience, and resurrect his life and put him back on the street as a member of our society.
Any of the welfare programs that are state-based, state-run, do you see any value in taking those recipients and putting them to work in something productive at all? Do you see any way to do that?
They have to have a skill set, is the problem, and there has to be a willingness. And the willingness is generally caused by hunger. So you're going to have to cut that check down. You're going to have that motivator.
In other words, making a requirement out of working so you get something out of it.
Right.
Somebody gets $15,000 a year, at least they could maybe do $5,000 a year. Lower that burden somewhat.
It gives you an idea. We, at STEP, over the last 25, 30 years, we hand out a little, like 10 coupons that say hot meal, job, and a bed. And you get 10 of them. And you get a hot meal, a job, and a bed if you show up. We've handed out 400,000 of those over 30 years. 41 of them have been returned. The problem is our unwillingness to recognize the problem. So, for instance, flip the switch on unemployment benefits for people who don't pay taxes. You've got groups of people that don't pay taxes, and that switch was flipped 8 years ago by Don Mars. That amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The way you account for what you're doing, you could look into that and fix it immediately. Why not make college professors teach their own courses? You could save $50 million a year with that one.
Can you do one more?
Okay, great. Yeah.
As governor, what's the first federal law you would nullify?
You could take any of the issues associated with the 10th Amendment and go right down the list. The first thing you'd have to do is stop taking federal funds so you're not a heroin addict to Washington.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. It's a 10th Amendment issue. That's the reason the marijuana 64, I was the only mayor to come out pro-64, all the rest of them. The Metro Mayor's Caucus said, well, then you had to have consensus, 100%. So one stopped it. I stopped them from taking a negative stance on it. I gave them a 28-page research paper on the Volstead Act. Actually flipped 3 of them, including Mayor Hogan from Aurora. So, typical of government, now consensus is all but 5. They changed it.
Listen to the old man. Listen to the old man. Listen to the old man when you can.